Before we start this video, a large thank you to Sharon Jiv, Anomalium, and Hua, Yash, FRT, and Dewey for their support on Patreon. I'm probably butchering your names. Thank you very much for the support, gentlemen, and I hope you enjoy the video. And an immense thank you to Halo Burner and Kino for their continued support of the channel this month on Patreon. It's greatly and sincerely appreciated, my friends, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hello everybody, today we are going to begin our archery system. So let's first go to the scripts folder, and I'm going to organize all my scripts quickly and put them into the proper folders. So weapons, going to make a folder for weapons, and then I'm going to make one for equipment and put that in there as well. And then right after that, we're going to make our first new script of the video, the ranged weapon item. So I'm going to right click here, create new C# script. I'm going to call this ranged weapon item. Now let's open that up and delete the start and update method, as is per tradition, and drop in our namespace. Mine is SG. And we're going to put two things here. That's all we really need. We're not going to use these two things in this video, but just to have it here. First, let's make it derived from the weapon item class. And we're going to also create our asset menu. So it will be menu name is equal to items / weapons / ranged weapon. So the two things we need to put here are two sets of sounds. One for draw sounds and one for release sounds. So header, range, sound effects, and this will be true whether you're using a crossbow or a bow. You're going to have a notch / load sound, and then a release / fire sound. So I'm going to make an array because I'm probably going to use multiple and randomly pick one, so it's not the same every single time. So I got draw sounds and release sounds. I can save that. Now, let's go back into the project, go to data, items, weapons. Going to create a new folder for ranged weapons. And I'm going to make our weapon that we're going to do all our testing with, and what we're going to build the system out of to use, which is going to be a bow weapon. So weapons, ranged weapon, bow. Now, crossbows can work a little bit differently, but we'll get into that much later. If you don't want to hold the button to hold the arrow, you can kind of tap it to load it and then roll around while it's loaded. But let's go make a new weapon class in our enums, call it bow, and let's set this weapon class to bow. I'm just going to set the requirements up and some damage. I'm just going to pop back in a second. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So 72 damage. That looks good. All the modifiers look good. That's cool. All right. World item database. Let's make sure we add that in so we can actually load it in game. Otherwise, we won't be able to equip it or load it or save it. Let's go to our scripts folder. Go to items. Let's create or in a new script in the equipment folder for range projectile item. So what is this? This is going to be the ammo. So whether it's going to be an arrow or a bolt or whatever. So let's open that up. Delete the start and update functionality. Drop in your namespace. And we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to create an asset menu in a moment. Let's go to our enums now and add a new enum. So we have weapon class, spell class. This is going to be projectile class. So public enum projectile class. So this is going to basically be used to determine if your bow or your crossbow can fire this projectile type. So arrow and bolt's an example, but then you could have a great arrow or a great bolt, or you could have whatever you want here. If you're using some kind of weird ranged device that requires a specific kind of ammo, this is used to determine which ranged weapon can fire which ammo. So put a comment there, save that, jump back into your ranged projectile item script. Let's make a public projectile class variable and call this projectile class. So what else do we need? We need velocity. This will determine how fast the projectile is going to fly. And we can have a few settings here to kind of tweak how it's going to behave. So I'm going to make a header for velocity. And then I am going to make a serialized, actually a public field, because we're going to be referencing this from another script to actually instantiate the arrow and add velocity to it. So we got forward velocity, I'll say 2200. We have upward velocity. By default, I'm going to say 0. But if you want it to pop up a little bit when you fire it, that's what you're going to want to edit. And then we're going to have the ammo mass. This is the weight of the rigid body that is going to be attached to the arrow. All right, right below that, let's make another header for capacity. So we have the current and maximum capacities. These are going to be ints. So public int max ammo amount, I'm going to say is equal to 30. And then public int current ammo amount. By default, I'm just going to set this to 30. So current ammo amount, and you can set it to 99, 100, 150, whatever you want. I'm just picking a number, if I'm being honest. Range projectile item. You can make this equipment if you want. If you want the ammo to have some weight to it. If not, make it a regular item. But if you want to make this like a quiver instead of a set of arrows, you want the quivers to have some mass to them, set it up as an equipment item. So weapon base damage. I just copied this from the melee weapon class. I'm just going to change this to damage, this header, and we just have all the basic damage types here. Just to save some time, I copied and pasted it. And right below that, I will make another header for item model. Actually, let's call this model. So there's two here, much like a spell. We're going to have a warm-up and a live version. So a public game object, we'll call this warm-up projectile model. And then right below that, we can say live or release or fire projectile model. You know, just to keep the naming conventions the same with what we're doing here, I'm just going to copy this right here and change this to draw projectile model. And actually, I will keep this one's release. We have draw projectile model and release projectile model. So one's for when you have the bow just load up and not firing, and then the other one actually instantiates when the arrow becomes live and has a damage glider. So let's create an asset menu name items/ranged projectile. Let's save that, and let's go ahead and make that now in the project. Go to data, items, gonna make a new folder because you might have many projectiles in your game. Standard arrows, heavy arrows, poison arrows, fire arrows, whatever. Open this up, right click, create items, ranged projectile. I'm just gonna call this arrow or standard arrow. Standard arrow sounds good. This will be just the basic arrow. Nothing special about it, just some physical damage, medium weight. Item name is going to be standard arrow, and you can add a description if you want, a well-balanced arrow. And then I will give it some damage, and then I'm not gonna mess with anything else for now. Next, let's go to the world item database because now we have a new item type and we need to make sure we add this to our world item database. So copy and paste any of this current items. I'm going to copy spells. I'm going to change spells to projectiles. I'm going to change the keyword here, just spells to projectiles, and then spell item becomes range projectile item. And after I have this list, I'm going to make sure that I'm checking every item in this list and I'm adding it to our overall items database. So down here in Awake, you see we have a bunch of for eaches here that iterate through all of our other individual lists and add it to the massive list. I'm going to do the same thing here now for these projectiles. So for each item and projectiles, I'm going to add that item to the massive items list that we already have that contains every item in the game. And then we need a way to fetch these projectiles by ID should we need to search them, which we will in the future. So I'm going to copy and paste get spell by ID. I'm going to change spell item to range projectile item. Going to change get spell by ID to get projectile by ID. Instead of searching spells, I'm going to search projectiles, and that's it. Cool. All right, let's save that now and add that projectile to our world item database prefab. So I'm just going to drop that in right there. There we go. That is there. Now I'm going to go to the bow and arrow animation set. So if you are using any of my animation sets, we have this one on our store page as well. It contains a bunch of animations for bows and arrows, and if you have your own, that's cool too. What we're going to do now is set up our bow animator controller and then our aim blend tree. So I'm actually going to go and just create a new animator overrider controller and link in the description for the bow animation set if you do want to use it. So bow, and then I'm going to make this overrider humanoid controller, and then from there we're going to edit a few things. Now for right now, all we need to change is the two-handed animations, and that's it, to be honest, because it's going to share the same core animations with the sword, so we don't need to worry about that right now if you already have that in there. So if you're using the same thing I am for your base animations, don't override them, but if you're not using core for your base animations, then definitely override the one-hand animations. I'm going to delete this legacy folder. These are the old animations in the bow, so it's easier for me to search animations without being confused. You don't need to do that. If you prefer the old ones, you can use them. But now if I go into this animation, for example, and type in bow two-hand run, I only get one set of running animations, not like 4. Because the old has a right and left version of the hand instead of just mirroring the animations. It has a, and then you're getting the newer versions where we updated it. So I'm just going to delete the legacy versions and put these in here so I can see it very much more clearly. Plus, if you also just want to mirror the hand that the bow is in, you can also just mirror on the animation stage the newer versions of the animations. All right, I'm just going to drop a few more of these in, and then you guys know how it goes. Make sure you're putting in the right animations and not accidentally using the crouch ones. That's easy to do because it's just bow, run, and walk, and then there's bow, run, and walk, crouch. So we're going to replace all the two-handed animations, and if you're not using the core for your main hand animations, drop in those as well to replace whatever you are using. Let's just see, walk back. Yes, we got run and walk for two-handed. And now I'm just going to take this bow object, shout out to Cinti, by the way, for letting us use this. It's awesome. We just rigged it and kind of changed it a little bit. But this is the bow model that comes in the pack. If you happen to have any Cinti or the Cinti character set, you can actually drag in the material and texture on that, and it will look just like that. So let's set up the weapon now. I am going to make this a prefab, weapon underscore bow underscore 01, and then I am going to drag that into here. I just want to make sure it's actually setting up properly. Let's add the bow animator override, and I'm going to drop in game. Also going to drag in this icon from Nephilim that I stole and put that in there as well. And then we're going to test this in game and actually set up the pivot correctly to make sure that's all working. Oh, almost forgot to. Let's actually add the animator to the main game object here, and then create an empty parent for the pivot, and then another parent for the name of the weapon. So basically, the weapon underscore bow underscore one that I have, that's where I want to put the animator, because then it's going to use the bow object animations and use the prop bow rigged right below it. And I'll have weapon pivot as a parent of that, and as a parent of that, I'll just have the weapon underscore bow underscore 01. So I am just going to, you can see here, this is where I'm going to change around the pivot. I'm just going to override that prefab. So I will drag this over here now and write nested prefabs. Make sure you unpack this prefab first. You just did the same thing as me. Now drag it in there. There we go. Replace anyway. All right, cool. So let's go into the prefab here and also add the weapon manager. Now you don't need a damage clutter for this because you're never going to melee someone with a bow, but if you are, I mean, you can just add one. Then you have to make sure you set up the damage collision and the layers, so it has to be layered damage clutter, but I'm not going to do that because I'm never going to allow the character to melee with the bow. So let's go to the weapon manager here and say if melee damage clutter equals null, return. This is under set weapon damage, just because if we're using a bow, we're never going to have melee damage clutter. Now I'm going to get back out of that, and also make sure you add your weapon manager on the top object, the main object, because you can see here it gets component from the model, the main game object, otherwise you get an error. Okay, in game I have this bow loaded in my hand. I'm going to adjust the pivot until I'm happy. So I'm just going to go over here now, just like so, grab this, make sure I grab the weapon pivot game object I just created, and I'm just not going to spend too much time on this. I won't get it perfect. I'll just make sure it looks nice. There we go. Copy component, go to weapon bow, open it up, go to the pivot, and then paste component values right here. And that's all I need to do. All right, cool. Now let's go and set up the animations. I also forgot to put in the bow two-handed idle and the bow main idle. That's important. You do want to replace your main idle with the bow main idle. And then don't forget your two-handed idle, or else you won't be idling when you're standing still. You'll be playing the whatever animation you had previously before it was overridden. All right, cool. Now, if I were to go to the animator here now, what you want to do is go to the base layer. And you can see here, this looks pretty clean right now. Unfortunately, it's going to get a little bit worse because we're going to add in a couple more states. So I'm going to copy and paste the locomotion two-handed weapon and the two-handed idle. And I'm going to replace this with, you could call it, I guess aim would be the best thing, or aiming, because this is going to be used when you have an arrow drawn or you're aiming with the bow. So you have aiming two-handed locomotion or two-handed weapon, and then you have aiming idle, or sorry, idle aiming two-handed weapon. So this is going to work exactly like we've set up all of our blend trees before. If you're familiar with this, I'm sure all of you are now, most of you, if not all of you at this point. We've done enough of these things. What you want to do is have the idle animation here, so let's go search that. It'll be bow two-handed aim 01, I believe, yes, right here. And then on this other blend tree, we're just going to do all the variations of movement. So it's going to be bow two-handed walk forward, and then, walk forward right, and walk forward left. And there's no running here. When you're aiming or holding an arrow, there's only walking. So we're actually going to delete the last few entries in this blend tree. No sprinting, obviously, either. So the idea is, obviously, is you want to limit the player's movement when they have an arrow drawn, so as to be not too busted where you could sprint around with a bow and shoot things while you're running. Unless you want that. If you want that, go for it. But we're going to get rid of the last few running animations here and only drop in the walking animations. All right, so from here then, we'll have almost everything we need to actually start digging into the functionality and the scripting logic of it all. We're just going to talk about transitions and where it's going to go from the bow two-handed aiming state to, say, your regular two-handed locomotion state. And we're going to drop in 2 more animations on the override layer, and then we'll be pretty much ready to go. So let's go here and now make some transitions. Is moving, this is all good, that's all fine, that can stay. Let's make a new parameter under here. So go to your animator window parameters bool, and I'm going to call this, we could say has arrow notched, or we could just use is aiming. Is aiming makes more sense too. All right, is aiming. And now what you want to do is go from your two-handed stance, because you can only aim if you're two-handing the weapon. So we go idle two-handed to idle aiming two-handed, and the condition has to be is aiming is true. And we're going to uncheck has exit time. This is an instant transition. No need to wait for the animation to loop. Make a transition back from aiming to two-handed, idle, regular, and make the condition is aiming false and untick has exit time. Now do the same thing for locomotion to aiming two-handed weapon. So basically the movement aiming and then the movement non-aiming, and make the same conditions for is aiming and is non-aiming, and make sure you on-tick has exit time. Now, since this is on the base layer, anything that plays on the override layer will override this. So if you get hit or damaged or whatever, the idea is it's going to knock us out of aiming, and then we're going to go back to the regular locomotion, and then we'll play a damage animation, yada yada. Now, on your action override, let's drag in those last two animations I was talking about. We're going to drag in fire and release, is it called? Or draw, sorry. Yeah, so bow, two-handed fire, and bow, two-handed draw. So you can see here's the animation. I'm going to grab that, put that in there. So you don't need to say two-handed in these animation names because you're always going to be two-handing the weapon when you draw, and you're always going to be two-handing the weapon when you fire. So because of that, I'm just going to say bow underscore draw underscore 01. And then I'm going to say bow underscore fire underscore 01. And I'm going to make that transition back to the empty state. So right click, make transition back here. All right, so you have everything you need now to start attempting to place in some script functionality. So most of you, if not all of you, at this point in the series are very capable of making this and setting it up on your own. So think about how we did the fireball. Think about how we discussed setting up as a network object versus setting up locally. And what I would like you to do is make an attempt to make it so you can draw an arrow and you can fire an arrow while locked on. You don't have to do the aiming. Bonus points if you want to do aiming. That's really awesome too. Go ahead and do that. But make it so you can draw an arrow and fire an arrow. And whenever you're locked onto, the arrow will seek as its target. So go ahead and try that out. And next week you can come back and check on how I did it. So thank you very much for joining me again this weekend, guys. I hope you all have a very lovely weekend. As always, an immense thank you to my patrons. It is because of each and every one of you I get to keep doing this. You have my sincerest gratitude and appreciation. I will see you guys next week.